confess to you that I decided that I'm going to go through with this series now until the end of November. And the main reason for it being that it has been my experience, and that's understandably so, that there are successive waves of interest in the public mind concerning Tolkien. I think thus far there were about three. One was when the books came out, including The Hobbit, which is the introductory volume, and then the three volumes of the Lord of the Rings, and then that sort of subsided, and then there came about the television series, and that revived the interest once again. And then after that, they still created a not terribly bad kind of remake of The Hobbit, which was also in the motion pictures, and that again created some interest. So it is my hope and prayer that a similar one or two episodes of interest will occur, because I do feel that this is a very important literature. And I heard with my own ears, I heard Joseph Campbell to say that this may very well be the myth of the 20th century. Now we would have to say of the 21st century as well. And I would say that that would be a fortuitous circumstance, because it is a very mysterious, very profound series of books, and their author was also an extremely talented but also extremely intuitive man, an Oxford professor but born in South Africa, in Bloemfontein, and by sheer coincidence I met a lady many years, of course, later, an actress, a very beautiful lady at that, who had lived as a young girl in the same town in South Africa that Tolkien lived, Bloemfontein. And so the only important information I ever acquired from her, however, was that Bloemfontein had the largest, let's see, what were they? Oh yeah, had the largest spiders in any place in Africa, and that they were so big and so fat that you could hear them walking on the roof. Now I tell you, when I have spiders that big around, then I'll leave them there and I'll go to somewhere else. But in any event, which may have influenced Tolkien in his the treatment of spiders in his book, because as you may recall, already in The Hobbit, in the introductory volume, when Bilbo the Hobbit and the dwarves come into the forest, there they meet a large and very unpleasant tribe of spiders, and they are trying to spin them in. The spiders try to spin them in to obviously eventually eat them. And then I think that then Bilbo sings a song to them. Old fat spider spinning in a tree, old fat spider won't see me. At a cup, down you drop, you never catch me up, you tree. Old Tom Noddy, all a big body, old Tom Noddy won't see me. At a cup, down you drop. So anyway, obviously there was a physical model for that particular spider menace, which is not the last one in the Lord of the Rings. There are obviously others. But let us say then I mentioned it before, I'm just very, very briefly going to mention that. Now, Tolkien's parents died, and he was an orphan, and then as an orphan, he was brought back to England and was raised there very largely by the village Catholic priest. They were a Catholic family, she never had a father and a mother, but apparently his lonely childhood had brought to him faculties of insight and vision that were not very common, let us say. And that being the case, am I not talking loud enough? Because, in another couple of weeks, I'm going to be 93 years old. So one of the things that tends to happen at this particular period of a person's life is that your voice gives out, then your hearing gives out, then your sight gives out, and others I will not even catalog. So, in any event, so he was brought to England, and he was largely brought up by this priest, and then in World War I he was inducted into the armed services of Britain, and in connection with that, in the Battle of the Marne in France, he was gravely wounded, and then he was returned to a military hospital in England and was there for a considerable period of time, and it would seem it was during that time of his recovery from his war wound that he began to have visionary experiences, which of course were not all confessed to, but he was beginning to hear voices and see people, and that is when he was, as he mentioned in his notes, his son Christopher Tolkien, his oldest son, became sort of his literary executor. Christopher Tolkien lived in the south of France, very nice place to live, and he made it his business to collect everything that his father had written and to make them available to people. So there are maybe about 12 or 13, 14 volumes of Tolkieniana that are available and that are not part of the Lord of the Rings. In any event, then he went to Oxford himself, and he graduated there, and then pretty soon he was a professor of linguistics himself. He was very interested in languages and in the origins of languages and things of that description, and which of course appears in the Lord of the Rings, because there are several languages that purely came from his consciousness or his Freudian unconscious, of which there are words mentioned, and there is information, let's say, available. He was a scholar of his own visions as well, not only of other things. So he was very careful about cataloging the information that came through him through these unusual channels, and then after, by then it was probably the very end or thereabouts of World War II, he began writing The Lord of the Rings, beginning with The Hobbit. And that's where I'm going to start now, because we're supposed to be dealing with hobbits tonight. So it is recorded, shall we say, that he himself had gone on record stating that this is the way that the concept and the word of a hobbit came to him. He was already teaching at Oxford, and while he was teaching, a student, probably some kind of a trickster, submitted a paper. And in this paper was a blank paper. And if you ever taught school, that's a pretty bad thing to happen to you. I must say that in the few years of my teaching, academic teaching, I never encountered a student as nasty as to submit a blank paper. But he had a blank paper, and so Professor Tolkien sat there, he looked at the blank paper, and he started sort of doodling. And his doodling ended up to a sentence: in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Boom. Now, he said he had absolutely no idea what or who a hobbit might be. He knew that the word somewhat resembled rabbit, but that's about all he knew. And however, as this often happens, this was the beginning of a whole literary cycle of his work and of what he considered to be really his major insights into life that he came to embody in the 3 volumes of The Lord of the Rings, plus the introductory volume of The Hobbit. So I would say that if one wanted to be very precise about it, then you could say that his doodling on the student's paper represented a form of automatic writing, because this happens. I have done it, other people have done it. You kind of allow yourself to go into a kind of reverie similar to a dream, and there you are, and then you start writing stuff. So it's a little bit like you become like a human Ouija board, and so that undoubtedly this was in some form an inspiration to him for his future work. Now, since we came to that start, we may, which is now I think of some importance, we may, in this case, because I don't have I had the books with me last time, big stack of them, but I only have The Hobbit with me because of some quotations. But let us say it became quite evident that he was engaged in a form of inspirational writing. Unfortunately, his academic associates and superiors had no objection to that. I know of some colleges and universities where if I or someone else started engaging in automatic writing or something of that sort, they would put you out on your ear. But such was not the case. The English, until recent times, because now everything is changing, and many things are changing for the worse, which is the nature of change. But let us say it might have occurred under other circumstances that his peculiar sources of literary inspiration would have been subject to criticism. But such was not the case with the Oxford dons, so dons as they are called, from old, the Spanish term for lord is don. So from going way back into history, the professors at Oxford are referred to as dons. And now you may think that I'm really digging today and jump around from one thing to the other, but you will see it's not really the case, because I befriended two people, one of whose book is here with me, and I'll quote from it later, who were, one was a professor at University of Southern California here, and head of the department, and became very friendly to me, and his wife, and we used to get together to talk about Tolkien, and they formed a Tolkien Society here, where we held meetings and read Tolkien, were all very enjoyable things. And they happened by the beneficent moves of fate. I happened to be in the British Isles when Professor Tolkien died. So they went to Oxford and they were present at the memorial service in the Oxford Chapel. They said this was the most impressive things that they had ever seen, and they were both involved in churchly matters. He says all the Oxford dons in their scarlet robes with the ermine and so forth, and Tolkien's son, one of Tolkien's sons who became a priest, he was a Jesuit. The Jesuit father was saying the Requiem Mass for his own father. It was apparently a very impressive event. And these were actually the two people, the couple, who had a great deal to do with arousing interest in Tolkien and his works in this country, and more particularly in California. Now, all right, let's jump back a little bit. So here was, again, one of these unusual revelatory events that a name of a species, of a kind of people, or something of that sort, came forth to Tolkien in his writings, entitled The Hobbit, and he had no idea, as I indicated before, as to what a hobbit is supposed to be. As time went on, of course, as he said, he made certain additional discoveries. And these discoveries were, of course, all internal. So what you had here was a literary man, a teacher, who at the same time was endowed with some extraordinary faculties, and who was receiving information of many kinds, including those involving other languages, more than one, languages that don't exist in any human society here on Earth, and that were incorporated in his books. Now, when one reads his material with some care, as one should, and maybe more than once, and I must confess that I have done, as far as The Lord of the Rings is concerned, I have read the 3 volumes 7 times. So let's say that shows that, at least to me, it held a great deal of interest. And so what we have really, and I mentioned that before, we have a mythology of a a different and yet in some respect similar world to our own. And that this is what the Tolkien called Middle Earth. And in this Middle Earth there are a number of human or humanoid tribes of people whom courageously Tolkien calls races. Now, of course, you'll be labeled a disciple of Hitler who used the word race, but he, being a scholar, had a better understanding of that. So what he had done, he had created a whole world that he called Middle Earth. And in this Middle Earth, as I mentioned in the first lecture in this series, there were a number of tribes, peoples, whatever you want to call it, and all having some considerable differences with, but also similarities with, people in our world. But as I mentioned, his first encounter with one of these groupings, with the hobbits, occurred when he found on the piece of paper in front of him in the following sentence, in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. And I said he didn't have the faintest notion as to what a hobbit was, but of course you might say it was revealed to him as time went on. Now you may recall that early on in this series last month we mentioned what what we called Tolkien's psychological types, and these he rather courageously and without regard for criticisms from the secular world, he referred to as races, and so he spoke of 5 and sometimes more races of beings in this world that he portrayed. And in a fashion, in a certain way, these do correspond not entirely, but to some extent, to the 4 elements of earth, water, fire, and air. Also, he didn't mention it that way. So we have a race of people, or curious little people, who are called dwarves. And these dwarves would represent, if anything, they would represent an attraction to the element of earth. Now you need to keep in mind that in various European cultures, especially the Alpine cultures of Switzerland, Austria, Bavaria, and others, and also, interestingly enough, in the British Isles, the awareness of the residence of some unusual beings was always present. And certainly among these unusual beings were what are referred to as the Irish, the little people. And the little people are, could be characterized as dwarves, but let us say a humanoid race of people who who are related to and always very much involved with the earth, with mountains, with the caves in the mountains, with mining and the finding of jewels and gold and things of that sort in the bowels of the earth, and who are portrayed by Tolkien as well as somewhat the traditional image of what in many European countries are referred to as the little people, the dwarves, Zwerge in German. Zwergisch is a little person, and they're usually portrayed in various forms of art as short, having long flowing beards, usually wearing what in German we call Zipfelmütze, a pointed hat, and who are apparently largely involved with finding interesting things in the earth and definitely having a strong relationship to the earth. These are particularly, this race, as Tolkien refers to them, this race is particularly prominent in the introductory volume, which is the introductory volume to The Lord of the Rings. So I advise, and others, that when possible, and you haven't, you're not familiar with the Tolkienian corpus, I would first read the Hobbit. Can be found in all kinds of places, which is also given the subtitle, the Enchanting Prelude to the Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, and there you will already prominently encounter the dwarves. I'll come back to that again in a minute. Then there is a tribe of people which we may have a little greater familiarity with, which in The Lord of the Rings is probably primarily referred to as men, because men in the traditional linguistics of the Anglo-Saxon tongues does not pertain to a male figure, but pertains to the genus human. So it's the homo, the human, the men. So the next tribe is that of the tribe of men, who we might say are, as far as their activities are concerned, somewhat ambivalent, because they have entry into several elements. And they are really the genus human as we are, except that owing to the fact that this is a work of fantasy, they have various qualities and activities that maybe somewhat to our regret we don't have. But then I'll just mention one more, and that is, and I mentioned them before, that is the elves. Now the elves in Tolkien's work are a sort of semi-angelic, immortal beings. So the writer of to a reader of biblical and related literature, when you encounter the elves in Tolkien's books, the likelihood is that you will liken them to angels. Now, the interesting thing about these three major races, but there are others too, is that they vaguely, but still rather powerfully correspond to three categories of souls that are represented according to existing literature by the ancient Gnostics. who refer to hiletics, hile meaning matter, hiletics, psychics, those of soul, and ultimately pneumatics, those of spirit. So what we have, earthly, or ensouled, human-souled, and ultimately a more than soul type of orientation, which is that of spirit, because the ancients, beginning with the Greeks, did not use, as we do so often and inaccurately, soul and spirit. Soul, pneuma, is the lesser manifestation of the spiritual principle, and when you come to the pneuma is Greek, which is already in that area, but let us say subhuman spiritual entities, such as Tolkien's dwarves, are people with souls, but not necessarily what we would call nowadays consciousness, and not necessarily what also we in later years came to call spirit. So the highest, the most subtle, the most transcendental aspect of the human is not present in the dwarf. Although intelligence is there, striving, energy, all kinds of things of that sort, and apparently considerable artistic proclivities, because in all their habitats, their caves, their underground places that they have built, we always have very artistic and very beautiful decorative motifs, in addition to all the often unusual and very valuable jewels and metals that they discover underneath the earth. So this would be what would correspond in the Gnostic nomenclature to hiletics, hile being material. And so this would be a type of humanoid being that is drawn to the material world, and that is trying to deal with and exploit, sometimes and certainly exploit and express the material world. In Jung's original classification of people, it would probably be called an extroverted psyche. The kind of psyche that has as its primary focus and activity the world outside of the particular person. So it's not just the original depth psychological classification, which primarily dealt with extrovert and introvert. So this would be definitely the extrovert, interested in and devoted to activity with the material universe, dwarf. Then we have, in the ancient Gnostic classification, we have the psychic. By the psychic, we don't mean the kind of dear people. I think now we even have some kind of a new publication. I don't know, have you encountered it yet in Los Angeles? That is a psychic magazine. I haven't read it yet, so I'm talking about something that I don't know anything about, so there we go. But in any event, of course, what, let's say, in this Tolkienian classification, that means, at least in my interpretation, that people who primarily live in and are devoted to the life of the psyche. In which respect I would think that probably many of us in this room, if not all of us, would qualify, because obviously we are the kind of people who are more interested in psyche, in soul, in mind, than we are in physicality or anything else for that matter. Because that's where the interesting things are. So when we go to bed and hopefully subsequently to sleep, and we close our eyes, what do we see? We see various images that come from where? They come from the psyche, they come from the soul. They are a psychic reality rather than a physical reality, but nevertheless very real. That's what the Gnostic said, that people of soul, among whom they included people who had a strong transcendental orientation in their spiritual, in their religious life, such as the ancient Egyptians, such as the Jews, such as the Persians. I would say by an awful lot of different people who were more interested in the psychic reality than they were in physical reality. And I would say that I, for one, am those who would not blame these people, because being somewhat acquainted with what I think are both realities, that the psychic is reality, if you don't mind me saying so, a hell of a lot more interesting than the physical reality. Even when the physical reality is transmogrified into various things, atomic physics and this, that, and the other thing, and all kinds of gizmos and computers and so forth, it's still not. It's not real to the extent that the psyche is real. Why? Well, you better ask somebody more informed than I if you're asking why. But let us say there is obviously a realm, a reality, a world, whatever you wish to call it, of psyche, of soul, a soul reality. And this soul reality lives within us and helps us with our consciousness, and in every other way is, let's say, is one of the most important realities whereby we meet life. Because we are people of soul. And then you might say, in addition to that, there is the spiritual, angelic, otherworldly, transcendental reality, which in Tolkien's classification would appertain to the elves, and which the ancient Gnostics would refer to as pneumatic, because pneuma, P-N-E-U-M-A, pneuma in Greek means spirit. And so there is therefore the people of soul are not the most refined, the most complex, and the most advanced, if you want to put it that way, of species of beings. But there is one of the spirit. Same way when we become sufficiently familiar with and at home within the world of psyche, our own psyche, then we are ready to enter the reality of spirit, of pneuma, a higher kind of reality, a more subtle kind of reality, an internal sense which gives us access to realms of reality and of being which are really above the ordinary, and which ultimately even C.G. Jung called them transcendental. Now, transcendental, of course, means something that goes beyond. If I transcend Beechwood Drive, then I'll be on the other side of Beechwood Drive. They have gone beyond. And so this is what the Gnostics call pneumatic, because they recognize that beyond the world of psyche, beyond the world of soul, of consciousness, there is yet a more profound, a more subtle, and ultimately probably more important and more interesting realm of being, and that is the realm of spirit. And that spirit has been called spirit or pneuma in Greek because in the majority of ancient mythologies, sacred scriptures and sacred poetry and things of that sort, it has always been represented as being that realm of reality which is beyond ordinary reality, that transcends ordinary reality. So with the psyche, you can transcend physical reality and a certain amount of psychic reality. It's interesting to note that with the powers of your psyche, you can transcend your psyche. But you have to try, otherwise it's not going to happen. But so it is, each one of these realms of being has sort of tentacles or roots that reach into a yet deeper reality. And so the roots of the psyche are in the pneuma, in the spirit. And the roots of the spirit, in turn, well, there you get more into the realm of transcendental religiosity, and you would say they are rooted in divinity, or in some manifestations of divinity, in the angelic and deific realms of existence. But so one after the other, owing to the fact that we have these faculties within us, we can move in these. So now then, that being the case, there is let's see. Yeah. So there is one category of these that we mentioned, or race, as Tolkien uses it, and we have to be aware of the fact that this whole hullabaloo about race and racialism and racial this and racial that has particularly popped up in our culture here in the United States within the last few decades has no equivalent in other countries and in other languages. So that really in German, for instance, which is my second native language, I was raised both in Hungarian and in German. When we speak of a race, it can be a race of dachshunds, let us say. That's the dachshund race. It's a very nice race. So you want to have any dogs, you should have a dachshund. They're the nicest, the wisest, the most intuitive and kindliest canines at least that I have encountered, but I certainly haven't encountered all of them, but I was raised among them. So these things need to be kept in mind. So there is let's say there is a category of groupings, families, tribes, races, whatever you want to call them, of beings, and in this case of people, who have the ability to have their consciousness function in particular ways. And now you might say, here we are, time is moving away with us, and I still only said about a hobbit that there was his name on that blank paper. So now what we are particularly interested in this evening is Tolkien's discovery or bringing forth a revelation of a simple, small people. They are also referred to as halflings because they reach about half of the height of a grown-up human. Simple little people who become very important as Tolkien's book goes on. And right there we have a hint of what I'm trying to really bring home to some extent this evening, namely that as the old American adage has it, don't judge a book by its cover. In the same way, we cannot judge living beings by their size, by any external characteristic. And that there can be humanoid in this case, or in some way, beings that we can relate to in consciousness in the world, who are not less than we are, but who are different from us, and that in the difference there may be great and important characteristics and discoveries which may be important for us to know. And so I'm convinced that among the many other interesting elements in The Lord of the Rings, the entire story itself, and I think I really feel remiss that here you come, and I am already on the second, let's say, chapter of the situation. I haven't told you too much about the story, but the story is now that this is Middle Earth, as he calls it, which is sort of a different world from ours. In Middle Earth, there are these beings whom I just indicated that live there. And they each have their own pursuits, their own interests, their own ways of leading life and of relating to other beings. And among them there is one particular unusual group. And now we are jumping back to the hobbit who lived in the hole. That there is one that is similar to some of the others and yet not the same. I would say it's probably the greatest similarity is that with the men or the humans, because hobbits in the book have a humanoid form. They are small, they are about half as tall as a regular human, but at the same time they are just like little humans. That is why they are referred to as halflings. So these people are a very interesting and very different group, and Tolkien had chosen to single them out as what ultimately is revealed as the most important and the most portentous of these various beings whom he describes. Let me see. And I guess I read to you in the introductory page to the authorized paperback edition published by Ballantine. These are only 2 paragraphs of a description of hobbits. Hobbits are little people, smaller than dwarves. They love peace and quiet and good-tilled earth. They dislike machines, but they are handy with tools. They are nimble, but don't like to hurry. I agree with them. Yeah. They have sharp ears and eyes. They are inclined to be fat. Yes. They wear bright colors, but seldom wear shoes. They like to laugh and eat, but seldom wear. Let me see what's happening here. They seldom wear shoes. They like to laugh and eat 6 meals a day if they can get them. And drink. They like parties and they like to give and receive presents. They inhabit a land they call the Shire, a place between the river Brandywine and the far downs. These are all geographical locations in Middle-earth. The Hobbit is a story of these delightful creatures, a story complete in itself, yet full of portent. For this is the book that tells of Bilbo Baggins, the far-wandering hobbit who discovered, some say stole, the one ring of power and brought it back to the Shire. And here I probably need to refer to a mistake in nomenclature that I made on the last occasion, where I said that the one hobbit who had discovered the magic ring, that is really the central magico-mystical object, was Frodo Baggins, but it actually was Bilbo Baggins, his uncle. So, let's see where are we? These are the delightful creatures. And so this is the absolutely necessary beginning to the great story of the War of the Rings, which J.R.R. Tolkien completes in his epic fantasy trilogy, The Lord of the Rings. So that should give us some sort of basic information. I may say in that respect that especially in some countries, I'm sure including the British Isles, which are filled with ancient Celtic heritage and all kinds of beliefs and recognitions of the existence of beings that you don't find in other places, and with some modifications elsewhere, that the qualities of these different beings exist in various forms. And now what we need to keep in mind that Tolkien had discovered and written about this this extra and extraordinary little race of hobbits for a dramatic purpose. and that it must be understood, because what is the basic underlying story, and most of you know it already, and most of you can probably express it more directly than I do, but what we have is a danger that hovers over Middle Earth. And this danger is that it is likely to be overtaken by a strange magical spiritual being who is referred to as the Dark Lord Sauron, and that if indeed this malefic entity gets his way and takes over Middle Earth and all the various beings therein, that would mean a tremendous catastrophe for all these various beings, all these races, including the human. So let's say Tolkien is expressing an anxiety which, in the wake of World War II, and the end of World War II, was certainly very greatly justified, and which I would say is equally justified now, only perhaps in a little different fashion. Excuse me, I have last couple of weeks I somehow have picked up a condition which manifests in a curious cough, and which doesn't seem to be the result of influenza or COVID or anything of that sort. So please excuse me for that. So now, in other words, the existential condition of Middle Earth is that it is in danger. And it's a very big danger. And it is, Tolkien, you know, was a very religious Catholic. He went to Mass every day when he could, and he served the Mass at the altar to the priest. His son, as we mentioned before, had become a Jesuit. So some of his understanding of reality can be better understood if we look at it from the entry point of the religious point of view. And with the religious point of view, let's see, Tolkien's universe, maybe I'm a little bit prejudiced in that respect. Is it cold? C'est froid?
It's okay.
Well, I think we have the heater on. At least I hear it making noise. I hope it doesn't bring cold air, in which case we'll get a cold revolver like Colonel Cody and shoot it. No?
It's on.
It's what?
It is on.
Okay, good. So I guess then we'll just leave it the way it is, right? All right. Now then, so let's say Middle Earth is in danger of being taken over by a supernatural being, and of course there are supernatural beings around. If you get hold of the book that was put out subsequent to the Lord of the Rings, the Silmarillion, you find all the many details of these mythologies. It's a very Gnostic mythology, wherein in the celestial realms, these creative beings, I encountered that not only in Gnosticism, but when you encounter it in Kabbalah, and I encountered it, for instance, in one organization with which I had some friendly relations, and I used to give lectures for them, one of the Japanese new religions. The new religions are religious groups that formed in Japan when, in the wake of the end of World War II, total religious freedom came about. One thing that General MacArthur brought. Up to that, the Buddhists were all right, the Shinto were all right, and various other people. But in any way, it is one of the new religions called Tenrikyo. Very interesting people, and it's only started in the 19th century, and now I am going to give you a whole disquisition on Tenrikyo, but let us see, the reason that I brought it up is that here is a completely new sort of shamanistic development. It came as a result of the activities and then the teachings of a Japanese countrywoman, Nakayama Miki, who then founded this new religion, brought people in it. Now it has several million people in the world. And the reason that I brought it up is that here is something that Nakayama Miki could hardly write. She had somebody who wrote for her. So obviously she did not copy this from any other sources. But she had a system, let's say a creation myth, and has it, that brings forth a system that is so Gnostic that it's downright nobody's business. It deals with celestial beings of very great power in the celestial realms, and some of them come to earth, and that is really how the world is created. So that, and above them all there is the supreme deity, Tenryo no Mikoto, which means the king of the highest heavens. So when before the Tenrikyo service, they have a brief service at their temple down First Street every day, every morning, and then they have a grand ceremony every week, and that's the one where I used to speak. You should have seen me in a beautiful silk Japanese kimono with the mon, the coat of arms of the Nakayama clan, who is the foundress and so forth. And I must say I enjoyed myself. I also enjoyed the sake and the various foods that were offered afterwards. And I could have very easily ended up in Japan because they did all they could to invite me to come with them to Japan. They had a place ready for me where I could teach in English, all kinds of things. And you know what I did? I said, no. It's too far away, too different a culture, and moreover, I kind of felt that I had something to do here. So this is where I remain. But in any event, there to hear something that just came out of the popular unconscious of Miki Nakayama at that time, and it's so Gnostic in its structure, in its creation myth, in all these things, that it's amazing. You know? It's also quite musical in the Japanese fashion. So, well, let's see what do I remember. Before every service, there is a big, great, so to say, the great mantra that is recited 9 times. Ashikiwo haro teta suketa nae tenryo no mikoto. And the great drums, boom, boom, boom. And then the second time, the third time, and it's an invocation to the highest Godhead to take away all evil and save us, O thou King of the highest heavens, which is his name, and that is recited 9 times. They have all kinds of, they go into healing, all sorts of things, but it is also very original Japanese folk religiosity, let us say. So it shows that the uncorrupted human mind, when it searches the mysteries of being and of creation, comes up often with very similar conclusions. And it doesn't come up with a talking snake in the garden that subverts Adam and Eve. It comes up with something a little more Gnostic than that, although of course that can be reinterpreted also. In any event, this is so in this Gnostic cosmology of the Lord of the Rings, you find that along the development of all these great aeonial beings coming out of the eternal, at some point something goes a little bit wrong. So here is our story of the rebellion in heaven and things of that sort, William Blake and all of that. So what happens is that one of the great beings turns not exactly evil, but sort of ambivalent, and that is Morgoth. And then from Morgoth comes a yet much more malign and dangerous creatures, and that is Sauron the Great, who eventually comes to Middle-earth and tries to take Middle-earth over. So spiritual evil in high places, as St. Paul has called it. It's an important thing to remember, because it would be useful, and I am not trying to promote some kind of scare stories of demonology, but let us say if we put our deeper vision, the eyes of our psyche, onto the events that are going on in our lives, we would find that behind and beyond and above and within so many of the developments of this earth, political, martial, technological and otherwise, there are not human but transhuman entities. And that is why if you look into the at a deeper level, and I can't recommend that because you have to be trained to do that sort of thing in one sort or the other. But there are, let's say, there are demonic spiritual forces that inspire the more unsavory and unpleasant activities of many people here on earth. It's very interesting to me how optimistic, silly optimistic most people are, because if you explain to them that bad things here on earth, whether they are Hitler or Stalin or this or that or the other thing, or various terrible developments, that they are not sui generis, as we call it in Latin. They don't originate of themselves, but they have connections, they have roots. They are rooted in some other realities, and those other realities are the truly sinister and the truly demonic ones. Now, as I say, I'm not trying to convert you to some kind of demonology, but if you are an adult person and maybe traveled around a bit in this world or so by now, and if you don't suspect very strongly that there is an active, very difficult to deal with evil in this world, well, then I would say that maybe you better go to the eye doctor and get yourself a new ability of vision, because it's not that difficult to see. It's much more difficult to discover good in this world than it is evil. Evil is always there. Now, it may be, and a knowledgeable friend of mine consoled me with that once. He said, look, the one thing about, obviously there is evil in the world, but the one thing that you need to remember is that usually evil does not have a very long life. So if you wait it out, yeah, so how long? Well, yeah, we had to wait it out for over 75 years before the Soviet Union collapsed. Well, I tell you what, few people lived that long. So, you know, but in any event, there are things that are really influenced by the dark side don't last forever. But while they last, they can make it terribly difficult for you, I assure you. So these things need to be kept. So in any event, there is a higher component of Sauron, the Dark Lord, which is in the transcendental realms that Tolkien writes about, the eternal islands and so forth. And he is the one who sends this really malefic creature to Middle-earth, where they slowly gain more and more influence. And we come to the book right at the time when that influence is growing and is pretty menacing, and various people, including Gandalf, the wizard, the magician, and others, see that this is what is happening, and they finally, with searching their various magical records, they come to the conclusion that the one way to put this evil power out of business and to restore a more benign and ultimately fruitful regime here in Middle-earth is if a particular magical object which Sauron, the Dark Lord, knows about and seeks and wants, when that is destroyed. As long as that is the magic ring. That is why the books are called the Lord of the Rings, and the Lord of the Rings is this particular Dark Lord. So what is happening now is that the Dark Lord, as well as the good magicians like Gandalf and so, they are looking for that ring, because with that ring, either the Dark Lord becomes the ruler of Middle-earth, or if the ring comes to his opponents, then his power can be destroyed. So that is really, to a large extent, which is the story underneath the legend of the Lord of the Rings. And so what happens is that I don't want to go into the details, but owing to historical circumstances, in an earlier war, one of the human kings had that ring, and he had it on his hand in the war. And then he was shot with an arrow at the river shore, and the ring fell into the waters. And so many, many ages later, some curious little creatures that are similar to hobbits, namely they are known as the tribe of the Stoors, discover this ring, and one of them becomes just completely enamored with it, and this is Smeagol, subsequently known as Gollum, who then is so taken over by the ring that he takes the ring and flees his own family and his own country and goes into the underground caves of a large mountain range, and lives in the mountain range there, because the one thing that he notices, and that is of course there, is that when wearing that ring, he becomes invisible. And you can sort of give it some thought as to how interesting and in some ways convenient, but also malign it might be if we had such a ring. I mean, we could do all kinds of things and never be found out. We wouldn't even need the Los Angeles city attorney to give us a free pass for every kind of crime, as the one whom which we just voted out has done, because we would have something very important. And now it really unravels that this ring in turn has to be brought into a situation where it will be destroyed. If the magic ring is destroyed, that is sort of the last piece of the puzzle. That this evil entity who now established himself in his own, he built his own city, his own fortress, Mordor, and that's where he is. And if he gets the one ring, which they refer to the magic ring. Of course, the story is much longer, but this should suffice. Then he will be the unquestioned and unending Lord of the world. And so now, obviously, these strange circumstances are also known to others who are trying to prevent this from happening, and to indicate to you, and we still have a couple of evenings left this month, and I'll go into greater details, but that what happens is eventually that now a great campaign starts, which is largely planned by the White Wizard, Gandalf, and that campaign is trying to get hold of the ring and to destroy it, because only when the magic ring, the one ring, is destroyed will the power of that ring disappear and not fall into the hands of the great Lord of Evil. And so what happens is that one hobbit, who is the hobbit Bilbo, has this inadvertently, by way of a circumstance that no one could have foreseen, which is the way these things work. I can testify to that in many cases, that some of the most portentous events in my own life, let us say, which has saved my life, sometimes the life of my parents, which has given us various opportunities that otherwise would not have occurred, was all the result of mystical, magical circumstance. Something came, something was said, here, now this is what you have to do. But, you know what? You have to have the right ear to listen to it. Because if you don't, then you're not going to take advantage of the opportunity. But fortunately, like in my case, there were enough of us who were alert enough to these strange influences that we caught on to what was whispered to us, what we should do, what was whispered to us where we should go, and as the result of that, it succeeded. Praise God that it did. Now, this is a circumstance of life and of the psyche that is absolutely true and that I can testify to any time with the greatest conviction because I have experienced it. And so we have something over here. Bilbo the Hobbit does not know that this ring is the key to the salvation of the world, so to say. In fact, there were some who have written about the Lord of the Rings with a kind of theological thing, and they made the ring into a symbol of salvation, which it could very well be. But on the whole, something very important is trying to reveal itself, and it's only slowly one adventure after the other that even little Bilbo Baggins begins to discover that he has some. Then he manages to abscond with the ring from this miserable little hobbit-like creature who is down there lives underneath the mountain. And Bilbo, because the creature who had found the ring had somehow down there in the dark on the ground had lost the ring, and the ring fell out. And Bilbo, who in the course of his adventures came to that cave, discovers the ring. When he puts it on, he discovers that he's invisible. He says, aha, now this is an interesting development. And in that manner, he manages to hide from the previous owner of the ring, who had dropped it into the water, and then Bilbo makes off with it. Of course, now the creature who had lost the ring is extremely put out and extremely angry, and he organizes all kinds of activities in order to catch up and to get his ring away, get his ring back. But what we need to keep in mind, therefore, that seeming fortuitous events enter. And yet these fortuitous events are somehow within the scheme of things so that he may find the ring and eventually manage to arrange with his relatives, with his nephew and others, to have the ring destroyed, which is the great final denouement of the story. But the important thing at this time is that there is an instrument of terrible possible work, of terrible possible consequences, which is in the world, and which probably with some magical guidance and other assisting agencies is rediscovered by the Hobbit. And now the little people, under that particular Hobbit who then passes it on to his nephew, has the magic ring which, when destroyed, when taken away from the influence of the Dark Lord, can completely turn around the fate of Middle-earth and bring about a situation in which the good, the helpful, the spiritual prevail, and where the evil is then sent into outer space, so to say. So, that is the main story. But we need to remember there also that all along, who discovered the ring in the water? A Hobbit. Eventually, who does take the ring? but that old hobbit's nephew, Frodo, he is entrusted with the ring, he and his hobbit companions, and with under terribly difficult and painful and awful circumstances, he and his associates managed to get to the dark land where there is a volcano, Mount Ordwin, and he knows that if the only way to destroy the magic ring is to drop it into the fiery volcano. Now, I would say that when that task would be allocated to me, the chances are that I would run as fast as I could the other direction, because you can see that in for a terribly difficult task. Yet, as we shall talk about it subsequently, how are we doing time-wise? Well, in any event, oh yeah, just a little time left. So let's say that is sort of where the really great task begins. But what I want to bring to your attention, what I really wanted to have as our sort of our main focus today, that while there are all sorts of very wise, very powerful, very valiant, good warriors and great powerful wizards and magic elves in the world, they are not the one to whom the task falls to destroy the evil ring. The task falls to a little hobbit. And this in itself, I think, is a very significant element that Tolkien brought in. And I recommend to you, it's probably not easy to get nowadays, a book, the author of which I know, and which I think has some very, very interesting theories and discoveries, which is called Good News from Tolkien's Middle-earth, by a lady named Gracia Fay Elwood. Now, Gracia Fay Elwood, I believe, is still alive. I saw her maybe a couple of years ago. She and her husband, Robert Elwood, were all associated with the academic world. I don't want, but anyway, she was a very interesting and very smart lady. And when she wrote this, I wouldn't be surprised it was probably a doctor's thesis to begin with, or master's dissertation, or doctor's dissertation, something of that sort. But she and her husband both were in the Divinity School of the University of Chicago. And they were both students of, maybe you guessed it, maybe you didn't, of the great Romanian mythology scholar, the one who founded modern mythology, Mircea Eliade, God bless his soul. And they said that when they went back to their dormitories and things like that, late at night, from the study halls and things like that, they always could look up on this one building, and there was one window that was alight, and that was Mircea Eliade's office. Stayed up all night. A very, very great man who really, hadn't been for Mircea Eliade, there wouldn't have been a Joseph Campbell. There wouldn't have been. He was the granddaddy of them all. Great and wonderful scholar. In any event, these people were students of his, and they both were studying to become Episcopal ministers. And Dr. Elwood, my friend Robert Elwood, did become ordained. But this was way back in the 50s, and maybe very early 60s. And Gracia Fay, his wife, although she studied like crazy, at the time the Episcopal Church would not ordain any women yet. So she remained without, which was not very much to her benefit. I really have great respect for her and her husband. Her husband is about my age, so I'm not so sure whether I have to address him in this world or in the next. But anyway, very, very, very fine people. And she wrote this particular book in connection with her divinity school studies at Chicago University, and it is very interesting, and in it there are innumerable, really unusual, and I have, I have over a dozen books on about Tolkien that are still in my library, even though they're hard to find, because nothing is easy to find there. But let's say, she has made discoveries, and she has insights in this book that in all the other Tolkien literature about Tolkien you don't find. And so you can find some very, very interesting food for thought in this book, and I hope you find a copy, and if you don't, then we'll just spend some money and we'll reprint the whole thing illegally, and then we'll send a few $100 to Gracia Fay if she's still alive. In any event, she has some very, very wonderful insights there. And since she was studying theology, which have as the objective the destruction of the darkness and the evil power, even as Christian theology has the figure of Jesus Christ performing the same. So I will get into some of the details of that later, but let's say, so there are a number of interesting insights into this situation. And moreover, let's say, I have mentioned before, probably in the last lecture or so, and I mention now again, that we are not dealing with, we are dealing with very powerful symbolism in this book, in The Lord of the Rings. We are not dealing with mere analogies in the Greek fashion and so forth, where you can say, well, this means that, and people have tried to interpret The Lord of the Rings that way, but that's a false interpretation. See, there are two ways of understanding really important things. One of them is to be able to analyze in a very deep and probably depth psychological manner the story that is presented to you, and then interpret that. And the other one is to get the wings of Hermes and to fly into the place where the ability of correct interpretation and helpful interpretation abides, which is of course the superior one. And so people like Tolkien and people like Goethe, all kinds of great writers and poets, usually had a way, they had a key to that strange, mysterious door behind which truth dwells. And outside that door, there is no truth. Don't look for it there, because you're not going to find it. But if you can open the door, and that door, where is the door? Right here in your psyche. That is why Carl Jung said, among other things, that the most important things about the Gnostics was that all their teachings, all their information came from their psyche. They had gained access to the inner chamber of the mystery, and then they were able to utilize that in that case, in religious fashion, because that could be done at that time. One of the things that the most important things about the Gnostics was that all their teachings, all their information came from their psyche. They had gained access to the inner chamber of the mystery, and then they were able to utilize that in that case in a religious fashion, but we don't have that. So this is sort of the way here. Tolkien was able to spin the yarn, to create the great story, the great epic, because he knew that by doing that, he would reveal something very important, and several important things. Right for this minute, because we don't have any more time, I would say, what was that discovery? The discovery was primarily that he found out that the location of the redemption, of the salvation, of the bettering of this world is inside the human being. And even though you may be a little hobbit who does hobbit things and so forth, I often, earlier years, I fantasized that. I even had a long hobbit pipe. I have traded that in as it were now for cigars. Easier to have. But in any event, the practical little people, the countrymen, the people who are nothing special. They are not university professors, they are not newly elected or not elected presidents, present time, but they are what they are, and they are able to discover, to move into the deeper side of things, and then all of a sudden they recognize. Just like Professor Tolkien recognized that in a hole in the ground there lived. And that was the beginning of a story of a supernatural battle which eventually leads to the redemption, to the help of the ultimate salvation of Middle-earth. And what is Middle-earth but another version of our earth? Our lives, our stages of our activity. Shakespeare says all the world is stage. The stage upon which we walk needs some people who are able to go there and to accomplish the work, to get to the point where the key can be turned, and when the key is turned, then all is well, and all manner of things shall be. And so I think that Tolkien has mapped a wonderful and a tremendously important internal way for us, how to go about this, how to deal with the psyche, how to find the magic ring that may be hidden away and that needs to be put into a place where it will not do any harm, where it will only do good, and many things of that sort, which, if all goes well, and if we find ourselves back here again a week from now, thereabouts, because we will continue this now until the end of November, then we will see more of it, and then I will indicate the great war against evil and how it is ultimately resolved. I think it is one of the most inspiring, transformative, wonderful tales that I have read, and I had read many, beginning with the time when I couldn't read. My mother was there reading it for me, and whether it was in German or whether it was in Hungarian. There have always been people of insight, of wisdom, who can see through the barriers that keep us from the way things really are. But these barriers can fall, and when they fall, then we know. And we shall know now, and we shall know tomorrow, and we shall know in all eternity. Thank you very much.